things about Article 8 that's kind of plain is it says tuition free. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to pay, the taxpayers have to pick up the tab for books. In fact, it was ruled a long time ago that because it didn't say books, and it said tuition only, that really taxpayers didn't have to pay for books, and books are going to cost extra. Now, in the intervening years, we started making buses because, we started, instead of the local schools you could walk to, we started building these behemoths that you had to take buses to. And we started having to put cafeterias in these things because by the time you sat in a hot bus and got to school, whatever you had in your lunch bags, box would be pretty skanky. So, the scale of operation changed such that everything that worked before didn't work. And then all of that was picked up by taxpayers. So we have cafeterias, and we have sporting facilities that would be the envy of a lot of colleges. Sure. All of this was not supposed to be in a common school. And yet taxpayers pick up the fund for all of that, and yet we still have to pay for books as an extra thing. Now, this makes no sense, first of all, but it's specifically unconstitutional. That is to say illegal, that is to say criminal, because your money is being stolen for this. I mean, if it's not authorized, if it's illegal, if the Constitution denies the authority to do it, it really is stolen money. And stealing, no matter who does it, is very bad. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that right now I understand. If you've not heard this before, it's going to sound pretty revolutionary. It's going to sound positively Jeffersonian. And sounding Jeffersonian these days is pretty, that just isn't done. So I know that, basically I've got a big road to hoe when it comes to convincing people that what worked in the past is correct. That it's legal, first of all, and that it really would work if we did it again. I mean, the hope is that we still have these constitutions. You can still find them. They haven't all been burned. I'm going to print out a whole bunch more of these things at some point. The hope in this is that if we ask for it, we get it. I think one of the things that was kind of encouraging is last summer, I suppose some of you have heard about the tax protests that are still kind of going on. There's still some of these Tea Party kind of things going on about property taxes. I had something to do with starting that first one. In fact, I have to admit, I was the guy holding the megaphone on the governor's lawn on July 4 of last year. Now, that protest turned into something kind of big, and it kind of got out of control. And I don't like some of the things that happened out of it. But one thing I like very much is that it became real obvious that if people say, you're fired, you're fired. Politicians who were entrenched. The mayor of Indianapolis, who was the president of the Council of Mayors, got fired. And if you think about what a shakeup that really was, to see that whole city council, whoop, and that was just, one day people got mad, one day they did it. Now, the fact is, we can do that with anything we want. Now, that tax protest movement was pretty amorphous. They didn't have any direction other than anger. They couldn't decide that we wanted to get rid of property tax entirely. They couldn't decide how we wanted to get rid of it. They couldn't focus on anything other than the fact that they were mad and that people needed to get fired. Now, I actually think some of the wrong people got fired. Not that they shouldn't have been fired anyway, but it was not really relevant to what they were angry about, but it showed the power that we have. Now, if you guys want the protection of constitutions, the charge here is that you can get it. All we have to do is get enough of the passionate few involved, and then that's really all we're talking about. We're not talking about the masses. The masses don't ever turn off their TV and go and protest or whatever. But if the passionate few are willing to get out and act, we can have the Constitution back again. People fought and died for this stuff for generations because it was worth fighting for. It worked. It's good stuff. Now, I guess the encouraging thing is that we can have it if we want it. The discouraging thing is that very few people understand what constitutions are, and the job ahead of us is to tell them, first of all, what they are, what they're for, and then get them to read them, and then so they understand the specifics of what we're asking for. And we have to do this by election day. Now, this is what Ron Paul had been trying to do to a degree with the federal Constitution. He pointed out certain things. He concentrated on a few. I'm not so sure how many people actually, as a result, read the Constitution, but I bet it's a pretty sizable number. I bet, that just this funny little campaign of Ron Paul that ended up getting more contributors, more total supporters than any other candidate, I'm betting that was an educational opportunity for the people who were supporting him to see things that they'd not been told before. They got energized by the fact they heard stuff in a way they'd not heard before. And now they've got some idea about what this is all about in terms of the use of violence and the restraint thereof. I mean, any fool can wield power, but it was the great politicians that restrained it. And that's what our politicians were all about at the founding of this nation, about the restraint of deadly force. And that's what Ron Paul was all about. Now, unless Dennis Kucinich can get the aliens to abduct, the other presidential candidate, I think it's unlikely that Ron Paul is going to be our next president. It's probably going to be McCain as a Republican nominee, and I'm not even going to guess who is going to be the next president. But the fact that we have a cause that encouraged so many people should be encouraging to us. All we need to do is harness that and understand that, frankly, the federal government is not really the place to talk about federalism. And while Ron Paul, running for president, had the bully pulpit and really should have talked about what he talked about, he did exactly what he needed to do in terms of talking about the proper use of presidential authority, the proper use of federal authority. He made that point pretty clear. But one of the things that he couldn't really address is that the states are the ones who are really supposed to own this whole process. We're the ones who are supposed to force it on the feds. We're the ones, being the United States of America, we are the ones who are supposed to force this issue of federalism on them, because you can't expect a bad dog to take the leash willingly. You can't expect a prisoner to bang on the door of the prison and say, "Let me in." These guys are going to fight. They're going to resist any restraint on their power. And it's up to us to force it on them. So our task, should we choose to accept it, and I hope you do, is that we have to start telling people this stuff real fast, real emphatically, but very persuasively. This is important stuff. And we're going to have to get up on the specifics of what the constitutions really say, how they really worked, how life is supposed to be in America. And that means, starting right here in Indiana. Anybody have any questions about that? I just blathered on for a long time. I didn't mean to do that.
How did it all start? What was the big switch?
Well, it's, unfortunately, I think it might be the wrong, it's a good question, but it's kind of the wrong paradigm. Because our default state as human beings is not to have a governed government. Our default state is oppression, slavery, genocide, war. It's kind of like the default state of your teeth is decay. You have to brush them. You have to decide to brush your teeth. And you have to do it all the time, or else your teeth will rot. And you're going to get in all kinds of trouble if you don't brush your teeth. So basically the problem is we stopped brushing our federal teeth. From the very beginning. I already mentioned, right at the very beginning of this country, we had, people slamming against the Constitution, like the Alien and Sedition Acts. What was that all about? That was a brand new country that was already ripping up the Constitution. Now, it's not to the degree we've done it today, but, the fact is that it started from the very beginning. Now, there were some key points in history that I guess you kind of have to mention. The Civil War is one that I kind of hate to talk about, but really, the states did have the right to secede. And that's one of those things that I don't want to say anymore about it, because it can breed hostility. But that's one thing where we just decided the states don't have the right to secede. Another one happened in 1913, maybe the ugliest of all, was, in my view, was the Federal Reserve Bank. And that was such an ugly monstrosity, just in terms of who really runs the country when you've got a whole bunch of secret bankers. We don't even know who these guys are, and a good number of them are foreign. But when they're in charge of our money supply, and when it's a debt currency based on, every dollar that's printed costs us a whole bunch of money, and it's inherently inflationary. And the Austrian school economists have talked about this very extensively, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But the fact that we have a central bank was something our founders warned us against very, very emphatically.